In 140 CE, ships arriving in Rome unloaded so much olive oil that the empire would eventually leave behind a man-made hill of broken jars, Monte Testaccio, built from roughly 25 million amphorae, and about 80% of them came from one region in southern Spain alone. This was not wine for aristocrats or perfume for the temple. This was fuel, food, medicine, light trade, tax, and power, poured from clay into nearly every part of imperial life. An average working person in the Roman world may have consumed around 20 liters of olive oil a year, a daily stream of calories and lamp fuel that touched the body from birth to burial. Olive oil was not a side dish to history. It was one of the engines of it, and that matters more than people think. But this story does not start in imperial Rome. It starts somewhere far earlier, in a world before empires, before writing, before even the city itself had fully taken shape. Around 5600 to 5000 BCE, on the coast of what is now Israel, at a Neolithic settlement called Kfar Samir, people were already crushing olives and straining out their oil. Archaeologists found crushing basins, a basket used for straining, and pits filled with olive waste, the oldest known evidence for olive oil production yet discovered. This first oil was nothing like the clean emerald liquid sold in modern glass bottles. It was cloudy, bitter, unstable. It likely turned quickly and carried bits of pulp and water in suspension. The work was slow and heavy. Stones crushed the fruit. Hands pressed the mash. Gravity did the rest. But there was something extraordinary hidden inside that crude liquid. It stored calories. It burned. It sealed. It softened. It healed. And this decision seemed small at the time. It was not. Wild olives had existed long before agriculture, but wild fruit is stubborn, small, and not especially generous. To make oil in useful quantities, communities had to learn which trees produced better fruit, how to propagate cuttings, where the olive would tolerate thin, rocky soils, and how long they were willing to wait, because an olive tree asks for patience before it gives abundance. Over centuries, cultivation spread across the eastern Mediterranean, into the Levant, Crete, mainland Greece, and beyond. Pollen records and would remain show the olive moving outside its natural range. Trade moved with it. So did ritual. So did habit. Long before the modern word for a supply chain existed, olive oil was already one. By the Bronze Age, the olive had become more than a crop. It had become an organizing principle. In Minoan Crete and Mycenaean Greece, oil was stored in large jars, measured, perfumed, and redistributed through palace economies. Some of it was eaten. Some of it was burned in lamps. Some of it was blended with aromatics like coriander, rose, myrrh, and cinnamon to make luxury oils that traveled farther and sold for more. Oil could move between the sacred and the practical without changing form. The same substance that lit a shrine could dress a wound or enrich a meal. In a world where wealth was often perishable, olive oil was a useful miracle. It could be stored, rationed, taxed, gifted, and offered to the gods. The Greeks wrapped the olive in myth because its value was already obvious in daily life. Athena, according to legend, won the city of Athens by giving its people the olive tree. And myths like that survive because they tell a blunt truth. A society with olive oil had light after sunset, calories without slaughter, a preservative base for herbs and perfumes, and a commodity for exchange. Greek athletes rubbed it on their skin. Households cooked with it. Temples burned it. Physicians prescribed it. The language of civilization itself began to absorb the olive's presence. This is the part of the story that most people never learn. Ancient olive oil was not just food, it was infrastructure. Then came Rome, and Rome did what Rome always did. It scaled everything. Olive oil moved from regional staple to imperial system. Conquest created roads, ports, tax districts, and protected sea lanes. Olive groves spread across Italy, North Africa, and especially Hispania Baetica, in what is now Andalusia in Spain. The Guadalquivir Valley became one of the great oil-producing landscapes of the ancient world. Roman agronomists wrote about spacing olive trees roughly 17.6 meters apart in some conditions, about harvesting at the right stage of ripeness, about pressing techniques, storage, and quality. Olive oil became a managed commodity, and this is where everything changed. The Roman appetite for oil was immense because the uses were endless. It flavored vegetables, grains, fish, and bread. It delivered calories efficiently in a diet that often lacked luxury, but demanded energy. Lamps burned it in homes, workshops, bathhouses, and churches. Before soap became common, oil was worked over the skin and scraped away with dirt in the baths. It appeared in ointments, newborn care, perfumes, and funerary rites. At nearby Herculaneum, isotopic evidence suggests working people may have consumed about 20 liters per person per year, around 55 milliliters a day. That is not garnish. That is a metabolic system. The empire needed container for all of it, so potters made amphorae by the millions. Merchants loaded them onto ships. Officials tracked them. Consumers emptied them. And then the jars broke. In Rome, those broken vessels accumulated into Monte Testaccio, a vast mound made largely of shattered olive oil amphorae. It stands as a physical statistic, a hill built out of consumption itself. One estimate places the number of amphorae at around 25 million in the UNESCO record, while other estimates run higher. Either way, the message is clear. Olive oil moved through Rome on an industrial scale centuries before the machine age. But there was a problem. The abundance had a labor system beneath it, and that labor was often brutal. Roman latifundia, the giant agricultural estates that spread from the 2nd century BCE onward, used large numbers of peasant and slave laborers. Olive oil, wine, and grain were not simply gifts of climate. They were products of land confiscation, concentration of ownership, and coerced work. Slaves on these estates were counted alongside cattle and tools as movable property. The glow of the Roman lamp looked softer than the system that fed it. Even in antiquity, liquid wealth often depended on hard bodies at the press. When the Western Roman Empire fractured in the 5th century, the olive world did not disappear, but it changed shape. Some trade routes shrank. Some groves were neglected. Some regions lost the administrative power that had organized long-distance exchange. Yet the olive endured because the tree itself is a master of survival, and because no successor culture was eager to surrender what oil could do. In monasteries, towns, and rural estates, it remained bound to worship, cooking, and craft. That continuity mattered. Not every ancient industry crossed the bridge into the medieval world intact. Olive oil did. From 711 to 1492, Islamic rule in much of the Iberian Peninsula gave olive cultivation new momentum. In Al-Andalus, agriculture was reorganized with improved irrigation, ditches, crop rotation, and more systematic land use. Some historians call this transformation a green revolution. Olive oil became central not only as food, but as lamp fuel, medicine, soap base, and perfume ingredient. Arabic left permanent marks on the vocabulary of the olive economy in Spain itself, in words connected to oil, mills, fruit, and containers. Producers distinguished among grades of oil, including high-quality forms extracted with minimal processing and lower-quality oils made with hotter, harsher methods. The technology was still pre-modern, but the understanding of classification, utility, and value had become highly sophisticated. The Islamic world more broadly helped preserve and extend olive culture across the Mediterranean. In places like Syria, Palestine, and North Africa, oil fed households and scholarship alike. Because the cities that carried the sciences, medicine, and trade of the medieval period still needed lamplight after dark. Soap traditions built on olive oil and alkali flourished, especially in the eastern Mediterranean. Long before modern chemical branding, olive oil was already embedded in industries that linked agriculture to urban life. And this is where everything changed again, because oil was no longer just a product of empire. It was becoming the shared habit of civilizations that traded, translated, and borrowed from one another. As European powers expanded into the Atlantic world, the olive traveled with them, though never as explosively as sugar, tobacco, or coffee. Spanish systems of cultivation, deeply shaped by Roman and Andalusian precedent, crossed the ocean into colonial territories. Olive trees arrived in parts of the Americas with Iberian settlers and missionaries. In California, the mission olive tradition emerged through the Spanish missions of the late 18th century. In South America, old groves took root in regions that could sustain the tree, but there was a limitation. Olives demand particular climate, and unlike sugarcane, they could not simply dominate every colony touched by conquest. Their empire remained ecological as much as political. Even so, colonial expansion widened the map of olive oil. Iberian knowledge, varieties, and processing methods spread outward, while Europe's own demand for oils kept rising. In the early modern era, olive oil also fed other industries. It was used in textiles, in the preparation of wool, in lighting, in ointments, and increasingly in soap making. Mediterranean regions such as Castile and Marseille became famous for soap because they had what the chemistry required: high-quality olive oil and the right alkaline materials. What had once been a household necessity was becoming a branded manufactured product. Then the Industrial Revolution arrived, and the old oil entered a new machine world. Steam power and mechanized production transformed scale and cost across Europe. Better presses, improved milling, and more controlled processing changed how oil could be extracted and refined. At the same time, plumbing, mass-produced soap, and urban hygiene altered demand. Olive oil still fed people in lit lamps, but also flowed into industries that depended on standardization. The 19th century did not kill the old olive economy. It reorganized it. Rural groves remained, but they were now connected to modern finance, rail transport, export markets, and urban consumers who expected regularity. And yet, for all the talk of progress, olive oil never escaped the old moral trap of agricultural wealth. This is the part that should make you angry. In modern Italy, especially in seasonal harvest zones, such as parts of Sicily, migrant labor has often carried the burden of the olive economy under appalling conditions. BBC reporting described undocumented workers living without running water, sewage, or electricity, paying about $1 for a shower and another $1 for a bucket of water, while some earned as little as $2 an hour or about $5 per crate during 12-hour shifts. The United Nations has estimated that 450,000 to 500,000 irregular migrants work in Italy's agricultural sector, roughly half the workforce. And in one olive harvest camp, more than 1,000 migrants arrived each year to work under gangmaster systems. They knew where the cheap labor came from, and too often the system kept going anyway. If you're finding this interesting, hit subscribe. We cover stories like this every week, and you will not want to miss what comes next. The remarkable thing is that even after thousands of years of conquest, faith, chemistry, labor conflict, and trade, olive oil is still expanding its world rather than shrinking inside it. According to International Olive Council estimates for the 2024-25 crop year, global olive oil production could reach about 3,375,500 tons, while world consumption could reach roughly 3,064,500 tons. Spain alone is projected at 1,289,900 tons, far ahead of every other producer. Turkey follows at 450,000 tons. Tunisia at 340,000. Greece at 250,000. Italy at 224,000. Portugal at 195,000. Syria at 105,000. Morocco at 90,000. Algeria at 85,000. Egypt at 40,000. Argentina at 32,000. This is not a quaint Mediterranean relic. It is a global agricultural system measured in millions of tons and traded across more than 1.2 million tons of imports and nearly 1.3 million tons of exports. Spain remains a giant because geography, variety, and industrial organization all converge there. Andalusia still carries the weight of Roman and Islamic inheritance, now paired with modern mills, export logistics, and large commercial estates. Turkey and Tunisia have expanded as major powers in their own right, proving that the eastern and southern Mediterranean never surrendered their ancient relationship with the olive. Greece continues to produce volumes far beyond what its size might suggest, and Italy, despite lower total production than Spain, still exerts enormous influence through branding, quality culture, and international distribution. Portugal has modernized rapidly. Morocco continues investing in groves and processing. Even countries far from the classical heartland, including Australia, the United States, Chile, and Argentina, now participate in a market that no longer belongs to any single sea. Modern consumers also turned olive oil into something ancient producers would recognize and still find surprising. It remains food, of course, but it is now also a health symbol supported by a large body of research. A 2024 Umbrella review concluded that olive oil intake is associated with benefits in cardiovascular disease and risk factors, cancer outcomes, mortality, diabetes, and markers of inflammation and body composition. Some of the underlying studies tracked effects by intake increments, such as 10 grams or 25 grams per day. In other words, the substance once used to anoint kings and clean athletes is now studied by statisticians and physicians in dose-response models. And this is where the story takes one final unexpected turn. Olive oil has gone to space. In a project studied by the European Space Agency, the Italian Space Agency, and researchers working with the International Space Station, extra virgin olive oil samples were sent into orbit to test how microgravity and radiation affect their physical, nutritional, and microbiological characteristics. NASA described the idea plainly. If olive oil can retain its antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties in space, it may help support astronaut health on long-duration missions. The oil that once lit clay lamps in the ancient Mediterranean is now being examined as a possible ally in missions that aim beyond Earth. Few products carry a timeline that wide. Even its economics still produce drama. Olive oil prices surged in the early 2020s under poor harvest conditions, then eased as supply recovered. In the European Union, consumer prices for olive oil in October 2024 were still 14.4% higher than a year earlier, even as the market began adjusting. When harvests fail, households feel it. When yields recover, governments, traders, and farmers notice immediately. For all the poetry attached to the olive branch, the market beneath it is hard, numerical, and deeply exposed to weather, geopolitics, labor, and water. That may be the deepest lesson in the history of olive oil. It is always sat at the meeting point of beauty and pressure. A gnarled tree on rocky ground, a lamp in a dark room, a merchant ship crossing the sea, a slave on a Roman estate, a migrant in a Sicilian harvest camp, a surgeon studying inflammation, an astronaut opening a packet in orbit. The substance changes form only slightly. The world around it keeps changing completely. It was there when palace economies rose in Bronze Age Crete. It was there when Greek athletes stepped into the arena. It was there when Roman ships filled the Tiber with amphorae. It was there when Allan Dulles replanted and re-engineered the fields of Iberia. It was there when soap makers in Marseille and Castile boiled chemistry into commerce. It was there when missionaries carried cuttings across oceans. It was there when laboratories began measuring antioxidants instead of blessings. It was there when space agencies packed food for orbit. And if you go back to that opening image, that hill of broken Roman jars outside the old city, what you are really looking at is not garbage. You're looking at the remains of civilization so dependent on olive oil that it left behind a mountain to prove it. After 7,500 years, that ancient liquid still does what it has always done. It feeds, it burns, it preserves, it enriches, it marks status. It crosses borders. It gathers labor and memory and profit around itself. And it is probably closer to you than any emperor ever imagined, sitting quietly in your kitchen right now. If this story surprised you, subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden histories behind everyday things.